Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Whispers. For 20 years, the silence was the loudest thing in my life. It was a physical presence, a house guest that never left. It sat across from me at the dinner table. It lay beside me in the empty half of the bed my wife, Eleanor, once occupied. And it hummed in the background of every quiet moment. 20 years is a long time to be a ghost to your own son. It's long enough to forget the sound of his adult voice. Long enough for the face you remember to be replaced by the occasional sterile photograph you might see online. It's long enough for a wound to stop bleeding and become a permanent, disfiguring scar. The break was not a slow drift. It was a seismic event, a clean, brutal shearing of a family. My son, Robert, was 22, fresh out of business school, his eyes burning with an ambition that was utterly alien to me. I was a librarian. Not a glorious, high-ranking director of a grand institution, but a humble archivist in a university library. My life's work was the quiet preservation of history, the careful cataloging of other people's stories. I found a deep, profound satisfaction in it. I believed in substance, in patience, in the slow accumulation of knowledge. Robert saw my life as a monumental failure. He saw my quiet contentment as a lack of drive, my stable but modest income as a prison of my own making. He worshipped at the altar of risk and reward, a religion whose tenets I could not and would not understand. The final conversation happened in my study, a room filled with the scent of old paper and leather, a scent he always claimed to hate. He had a business plan. It was a tech startup, something to do with algorithms and market disruption, a language of buzzwords that sounded to me like a gambler trying to justify his addiction. He needed $50,000, a sum that was, to me, astronomical. It was nearly all of my retirement savings, the nest egg Eleanor and I had painstakingly built over 30 years. He didn't ask for it as a loan. He demanded it as his due. He saw my savings not as my security, but as his launch pad. I said no. I didn't do it out of spite or a lack of faith in him, but out of a deep, paternal terror. I saw the recklessness in his eyes, the feverish certainty of a young man who has never truly failed at anything. I tried to explain, to teach him one last lesson about caution, about building a foundation before trying to build a skyscraper. He did not hear my caution. He heard only my refusal. The things he said that day, they are etched into my memory like acid on glass. He called me a coward, a man who had settled for a life half-lived. He said I was burying myself in dead people's stories because I was too afraid to write my own. The final blow, the one that shattered everything, was when he looked at the photograph of his mother on my desk and said, "She deserved more than this. She deserved more than you." Then he turned and walked out. He didn't just leave the room, he exited my life. The silence began that day. I would hear about him through the grapevine of distant relatives. He got a job at a brokerage firm. He was a shark, they said, a natural. He got married to a woman named Catherine, whose family had money and connections. I saw a photo of the wedding online. He looked handsome, successful, and like a complete stranger.
They had a child, a daughter they named Olivia, my granddaughter. I have never met her. I sent a gift, a carefully chosen collection of classic children's books, the ones I had read to him as a boy. I never received a thank you. I suspect they were never even opened. For 20 years I lived in my quiet world, and he lived in his loud one. My life was measured in the turning of pages, his in the fluctuation of stock prices. Eleanor passed away 10 years into the silence. I called him, leaving a message on a cold, impersonal voicemail. I told him his mother was gone. He didn't come to the funeral. He sent a wreath, a massive, ostentatious explosion of white lilies with a simple, professionally printed ribbon that read, "With deepest sympathy." It was a gesture so empty, so corporate, it was a greater insult than his absence. Life went on. I retired. The silence in the house grew deeper. I had my books, my small circle of friends, my memories. I had accepted my fate. I was a father with no son, a grandfather with no grandchild. I was a story that had ended mid-sentence. And then, 6 months ago, everything changed. My younger brother Samuel passed away. Sam was like me, a quiet man. He was a bachelor, a high school math teacher who lived in a tiny apartment and drove the same car for 30 years. He never spoke of money. It turned out my quiet, unassuming brother was a genius, a secret, brilliant stock market investor who had spent 40 years turning his modest teacher's salary into a fortune. He had lived like a pauper and invested like a king. And he left it all to me. The numbers the lawyer showed me were so large they seemed like a misprint. It wasn't just wealth, it was generational wealth. The kind of money that changes not just your life, but the lives of everyone who comes after you. It was a bewildering, terrifying, and deeply ironic twist of fate. The one thing I had never valued, the one thing that had cost me my son, had been dropped into my lap in a quantity I couldn't even comprehend. The news, of course, did not stay quiet. Probate records are public. A local paper ran a small human interest story about the humble librarian who had inherited a fortune. And then, 3 weeks ago, an envelope appeared in my mailbox. It was thick, cream-colored, with my name and address written in a beautiful feminine script that I knew was not my son's. Inside was a Christmas card. It was a picture of Robert, Catherine, and a teenage girl with my mother's eyes, Olivia. They were all smiling, a perfect, happy family standing in front of a fireplace in a house that looked like a palace. And inside, a short handwritten note from my son. The first words I'd seen from him in 2 decades. "Dad," it said, "it's been too long. We miss you. Please, come for Christmas this year. Let's put the past behind us. It's time to be a family again." I read the note 10 times, then 100. My heart, a foolish, stubborn organ, felt a flicker of hope so painful it was almost a physical blow. But my mind, the mind of a quiet man who has had 20 years to think, knew better.
He didn't miss me. He missed my money. He didn't want to be a family again. He wanted to be my heir. The invitation wasn't an olive branch. It was a business proposal. I looked at the photograph of the granddaughter I had never met. I looked at the ghost of the son I had lost, and I made a decision. I would go. I would walk into his world, the one he had chosen over me. But I would not be the man he was expecting. I would not be the rich, foolish old man, desperate for a reunion at any cost. I would be the quiet librarian. I would be a student of his new life, and I would conduct my final piece of research. I would go to his Christmas, and I would find out, once and for all, if there was anything left of my son to save. The weeks leading up to Christmas were a strange mixture of logistical preparation and psychological warfare. My first act was to not act like a rich man. When Robert called, a follow-up to his card, his voice was smooth and practiced, the voice of a salesman closing a deal. He was effusive, talking about how wonderful it would be, how much Catherine and Olivia were looking forward to finally meeting me properly. I played my part, the slightly doddery, lonely old man, overwhelmed by this sudden show of affection. My voice was quiet, hesitant. I told him I wasn't sure, that it had been so long. I let him persuade me, letting him feel like he was earning his victory. He offered to send a private car, to book a suite at a 5-star hotel. I politely refused. "No, no, son," I said, the word feeling like a foreign coin in my mouth. "I'll just drive myself. I'll get a room at a little motel just outside of town. I don't want to be any trouble." I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the momentary frustration quickly masked by more feigned solicitude. He was expecting a king, but a humble commoner was showing up. It threw the first small wrench into his perfectly calibrated machine. My second act was to understand the machine itself. I hired a private financial investigator, a discreet firm that specialized in a kind of corporate archaeology. I didn't want dirt. I wanted a blueprint. I wanted to understand the life my son had built. The report I received a week before my trip was illuminating and deeply sad.
Robert was, on paper, a resounding success. He was a partner at his firm. He owned a massive house in a wealthy suburb, a portfolio of stocks, and memberships to exclusive clubs. But beneath the glossy surface, the structure was precarious. He was leveraged to the hilt. The house had 2 mortgages. He had massive high-interest business loans taken out against his portfolio. He lived a life that was perpetually on the brink, a house of cards built on debt and the relentless need to project an image of effortless wealth. He wasn't rich, he was a high-wire artist, and he had forgotten to use a net. My inheritance wasn't just a potential windfall for him, it was a lifeline. He needed my money not just to get richer, but to keep from drowning. This knowledge was a heavy, cold comfort. It solidified my understanding of his motives and strengthened my resolve. My third act was to prepare my own contribution to the holiday. I did not go to a high-end store to buy expensive, meaningless gifts. Instead, I went to my old workshop, in the basement. I spent days there, surrounded by the ghosts of a happier time. I found a small, half-finished project from decades ago, a beautifully intricate wooden puzzle box I had started for Robert when he was a boy. I had designed it myself, a complex series of hidden slides and secret compartments. I had meant for it to be a lesson in patience, in looking beyond the obvious. We had our fight before I could ever finish it. I spent a week restoring it. I sanded the aged wood, repaired the delicate mechanisms, and finished it with a deep, lustrous oil. It was a piece of our shared history, a tangible symbol of the life he had rejected. It was a gift that had no price tag, but was filled with a meaning I knew he would be forced to confront. For his wife, Catherine, I chose a first edition of her favorite novel, something I discovered from a brief mention in an old alumni newsletter. It was a gesture that said, "I see you as an individual, not just as my son's wife." For Olivia, my granddaughter, I was at a loss. How do you buy a gift for a person who is a complete stranger? In the end, I chose a simple leather-bound journal and a beautiful fountain pen. I wrote a single inscription on the first page. "Every story is worth writing. I hope you will tell me yours one day." It was a gift not of an object, but of an invitation. The drive to his house on Christmas Eve was like a journey to a foreign country. My modest sedan felt like a dinghy in a sea of luxury SUVs as I pulled into his gated community. The houses were enormous, oppressively so, each one a monument to its owner's success. Robert's home was the largest of all, a sprawling modern palace of glass and white stone, professionally decorated for Christmas with a terrifying symmetrical perfection. There were no handmade ornaments, no charmingly tangled lights. It looked like a department store display. Robert met me at the door. He was older, of course, his hair showing streaks of gray, but he had the same restless, hungry energy in his eyes. He hugged me, a stiff, awkward embrace that was more of a collision than a connection. "Dad," he said, his smile wide and unconvincing, "you made it. We're so glad you're here." Catherine was behind him, a woman so perfectly put together she barely looked real. She was polite, gracious, but her eyes held a cool, appraising quality. And then I saw her, Olivia. She was 16, with her grandmother's intelligent eyes and a quiet, watchful demeanor. She stood back, an observer, her expression a mixture of curiosity and teenage awkwardness. When I was introduced to her, she shook my hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "It's nice to finally meet you, grandfather," she said, and her voice was the first genuine thing I had heard since I arrived. The evening was a performance. We ate a meal prepared by a caterer, served by a silent woman in a uniform. The conversation was a carefully curated monologue by Robert about his successes, his connections, his plans. He would drop names of important people, mention casual trips to exotic locations, and talk about the market with a fluency that was designed to both impress and exclude me. He was building his cage of success around me, trying to show me what my money could buy, what it could make me a part of. I just listened, nodding, playing the part of the simple, mesmerized father. I asked naive questions about his business, feigning confusion about the financial terms he tossed around so casually. He would explain them with a patient condescension, a teacher explaining a complex problem to a slow child. He was so confident in his superiority, so sure of my ignorance, that he never saw the trap he was walking into. I watched my granddaughter. She rarely spoke, but she watched everything. She watched her father's performance, her mother's polite smiles, and she watched me. There was a depth in her gaze, a hint of a soul that had not yet been completely subsumed by the sterile perfection of her surroundings. It was in her that my foolish, stubborn heart found a new and unexpected anchor. The evening ended with Robert walking me to the door. "We'll see you in the morning, Dad," he said, clapping my shoulder again. "For a real family Christmas, we have so much to talk about the future, about your legacy." There it was, the word, legacy, the bait on the hook. I smiled my gentle, foolish smile. "I look forward to it, son," I said. As I drove to my lonely motel room, I felt a profound sense of sadness, but no fear. The research phase was over. The presentation of my findings was scheduled for the morning. Christmas morning felt like the prelude to a battle. I sat in my sterile motel room, drinking a cup of lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, and felt a strange sense of calm. I was not the man I had been 20 years ago, reacting with hurt and anger. I was an archivist. I had gathered my data, I had organized my evidence, and I was ready to present my conclusions. The story was already written. I just had to read it aloud. When I arrived back at the house, the performance was in full swing. The air was thick with the scent of pine from the massive, perfectly decorated tree, and the sound of aggressively cheerful Christmas music. A mountain of presents was piled underneath it, a monument to a level of consumerism that I found genuinely staggering. Robert was practically vibrating with a forced manic energy, a host desperate for his party to be a success. He handed me a glass of champagne, which I politely declined in favor of coffee. He was dressed in a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than my first car. He was playing the part of the benevolent patriarch, the man who had everything and was now graciously welcoming his long-lost father back into the fold. The gift-giving began. It was an assembly line of luxury. Catherine received a diamond necklace. Olivia got the latest phone, a designer handbag, and a gift certificate for a spa weekend that was worth more than my monthly pension. It was all so impersonal, a series of transactions rather than expressions of love. My turn came. Robert handed me a heavy, beautifully wrapped box. "This is for you, Dad," he said, his voice loud, ensuring everyone was watching. Inside was a watch, a Swiss-made, absurdly intricate timepiece with a gleaming gold case and a crocodile leather strap. It was a masterpiece of engineering, and it was worth a sickening amount of money. "I know you always appreciated good craftsmanship," Robert said, his smile dripping with self-satisfaction. He thought he had found the perfect gift, a bridge between his world of luxury and my world of substance. He had missed the point so completely it was almost poetic. I thanked him, my voice quiet. I did not put the watch on. I placed it carefully back in its box. Then it was my turn. I handed my small, simply wrapped gifts to Catherine and Olivia first. Catherine was visibly surprised by the first edition, a flicker of genuine appreciation in her eyes before she caught herself and composed her polite socialite's mask. Olivia was intrigued by the journal. She ran her fingers over the leather cover, opened it to my inscription, and looked up at me with a thoughtful, questioning gaze. For a moment, a real connection passed between us. Finally, I turned to Robert. I handed him the puzzle box. He took it, his expression confused. It was so small, so humble, compared to the mountain of expensive presents around it. He turned it over in his hands. And then I saw it. A flicker of recognition, a ghost of a memory. "I remember this," he whispered, his voice losing its confident, salesman's tone for the first time. "You were making it for me, before." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. "I decided it was time to finish it," I said softly. He sat there, turning the box over and over, the memory of a different life, a different father-son relationship playing across his face. The room was quiet. The cheerful music seemed to have faded into the background. My humble gift had done what his expensive one could not. It had created a moment of genuine, uncomfortable silence. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the opening for the conversation about my legacy. He cleared his throat, setting the box aside, his business persona reasserting itself. "Dad," he began, his voice taking on a serious, confidential tone. "Now that we're all here, as a family, I think it's time we talked about the future. Your inheritance, it's a huge responsibility. You shouldn't have to bear that burden alone. I've been speaking with my financial advisors, and we've put together a proposal, a structure for a family trust that would manage the assets, grow them for future generations. For Olivia, for her children." He slid a thick, leather-bound portfolio across the coffee table. It was the proposal, the trap. He wanted me to put my entire fortune into a trust that he would control. He was asking me to hand over the keys to the kingdom. I looked at the portfolio. I looked at my son, his eyes gleaming with that same hungry ambition I remembered from 20 years ago. I looked at Catherine, her polite smile now fixed and expectant. And I looked at Olivia, who was watching me, her expression unreadable. I did not open the portfolio. I pushed it gently back across the table. "That won't be necessary, Robert," I said, my voice calm and clear.
The smile on his face froze. "What do you mean?" he asked, a note of sharp anxiety in his voice. "I mean," I said, leaning forward slightly, my quiet voice suddenly commanding the attention of the entire room, "that the inheritance is already taken care of. The burden, as you call it, has already been lifted." I let that statement hang in the air, a grenade with the pin pulled. Robert stared at me, his mind racing, unable to comprehend what I was saying. His perfectly planned Christmas, his meticulously orchestrated reunion, was beginning to spiral out of his control. The performance was over. It was time for the truth. Robert's face was a mask of confusion. "Taken care of? What are you talking about? I've seen the probate records. The money transferred to you. It's in your accounts." "It was," I said, my voice remaining quiet, forcing them to lean in, to listen. "For a short time. It was a very busy few months. You see, son, when I received this burden, I knew I couldn't manage it. I'm a librarian, not a financer. So I sought out experts. I created a plan for my legacy, just as you suggested." A flicker of relief crossed his face. He thought I had simply preempted him, that he could still get control. He had no idea what was coming. "I decided," I continued, "that the best way to honor my brother's memory was to create a foundation, the Samuel Vance Foundation for Applied Arts and Letters." I watched as the name sunk in. Not the Robert Vance Family Trust, a foundation. "It's an endowment, Robert," I explained, as if to a child. "Its purpose is to provide grants and apprenticeships to young people who want to pursue careers in the skilled trades and the humanities. We're funding watchmakers, bookbinders, carpenters, archivists, poets. We are investing in the very things you once told me were a waste of a life." The color drained from his face. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Catherine stared at me, her polite mask finally cracking, revealing a look of pure, unadulterated fury. "The entire fortune," I said, delivering the final quiet blow, "is now the property of the foundation. It has been transferred irrevocably. My personal accounts now contain enough for me to live comfortably exactly as I did before. Nothing more." "You gave it away?" Robert finally whispered, his voice choked with disbelief. "You gave my inheritance away to strangers?" "It was never your inheritance, Robert," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "It was my brother's life's work. And you have your own life's work. This house, your career, your family. You built this all without me, without my help. You told me 20 years ago that you wanted to write your own story. It seems you have. A very successful one from the looks of it. I had taken his greed and reframed it as his strength. I had taken the very argument he had used to leave me and used it to justify cutting him off. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the tinny sound of a carol from the expensive sound system. But I wasn't finished. I turned my gaze to Olivia, who was watching the entire exchange with wide, intelligent eyes. However, I said, and now my voice softened, I did make one other arrangement. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a simple sealed envelope. I handed it to her. That is for you, Olivia. It is a trust.
A separate, much smaller one that I established before the foundation was finalized. It is untouchable by anyone else, including your parents and myself. It is to be used for your education and to help you start your own life, whatever you choose that to be. It is not a fortune, but it is a foundation, a real one. I had protected my bloodline. I had separated the innocent from the guilty. I had drawn a clean, sharp line between my son's choices and my granddaughter's future. It was an act of love and an act of judgment, all in one. Robert just sat there, defeated, a general surveying a battlefield where his entire army had vanished. He hadn't just lost the money, he had been completely and utterly outmaneuvered. The simple, foolish old man he had sought to exploit had revealed himself to be a master strategist, using the quiet, patient skills of a librarian to dismantle his son's entire world. I stood up. The festive, suffocating room suddenly felt light and airy. "Thank you for the invitation," I said to the room at large. "It has been illuminating." I looked at Robert one last time. There was no anger left in me, only a vast, empty sadness. He had a choice. He could continue to worship the false gods of wealth and status that had led him to this ruin, or he could try to find his way back to something real. But that would be his story to write, not mine. "I have the puzzle box here," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper, picking it up from the table. How do I open it?" I looked at him, at the intricate handmade object in his hands, a symbol of a life of patience and substance that he had never understood. "You'll have to figure that out for yourself, son," I said. And with that, I turned and walked out of his perfect house, leaving the wreckage of his Christmas and his future behind me. I got into my simple car and drove away, back towards my quiet life. The silence was still there, but it was different now. It was no longer the silence of absence and loss. It was the silence of peace, the silence of a story that had, at long last, found its proper ending. This was Reddit Whispers. Stories heal when they're shared. What moment in your life still echoes in your mind? Write it below. We're listening.